Welcome into the Locked On Cavs podcast. Very special guest today. It's Bill DiFilippo from Dime on Up Rocks. We're going to talk all about Dyson Daniels today. Let's get into it. All right, the music you heard on the way in, at least in audio form, is from our friends at Astro Radio. Check them out on Spotify or Apple Music. I'm Chris Manning, covering the Cavs for places like the aforementioned Dime on Up Rocks, as well as Destination for the Sword. Evan, why don't you introduce yourself and our wonderful special guest?
My name is Evan Damerel. I'm 29 years old. I'm happily spoken for, but I enjoy long walks on the beach with a candlelit dinner afterwards. But joining us today is Dime on Uprock's own Bill DiFilippo, and as he put it, one of the only teenagers he spoke to in the draft process, Dyson Daniels. That's why we brought him in, because this is his area of expertise, and he's going to educate Chris and myself on him a bit better, and also educate you the listeners. Did I know the landing, Chris?
You did, Bill.
Really put me on the spot there.
Bill, how are you?
I'm doing all right, guys. I appreciate the invite to come on. Always great to come on and talk with. I think I've only ever been on here with Chris. I think this is the first time I've ever been on here with Evan, so I'm pretty stoked.
Bill,
I think this is our first time, so hopefully Chris doesn't kill the mood too much.
I will. Bill, I do have a surprise for you before we get into it. That is only for
as
you.
two Italian Penn State fans, hopefully Chris doesn't kill the mood.
Thanks a lot, Evan. You're French. All right, Bill.
I have a hunch I know where this is going, but please, by all means.
Okay.
The ribbons are blue. Manchester is blue. Let's all do the Poznan, everyone. Manchester City are the champions of the Premier League once again.
That's for you,
Bill. I thought it was going to be the fact that Holland has arrived in Manchester and he's meeting, this is his first time meeting with the club today. I thought you were doing something with that, but
haven't seen that yet. Looking forward to videos of him phoning Grealish out in the clubs doing weird shit. But
I hope we don't get copyright striked for that. So
guess what? We're not going to. All right, if we do, I'll cut it out. We'll figure it out. All right, Evan, let's talk. Let's dive into Dyson Daniels. Bill, you spoke to him. And he is, I think, a really interesting prospect in the sense that he's really young still. But he's been a pro since 15, played in the G League, comes from the G League system, which we'll start learning how those guys, I think, kind of how that works, how the transition works. So when you spoke to him, what stood out, what interests you about what he had to say? Just give me your Dyson Daniels kind of overview after you wrote the piece.
So the thing that stuck out to me the most about Dyson was something that his coach, Jason Hart, with the G League Ignite team. If any listener is a Syracuse basketball fan, you'll remember Jason Hart, a really good player for the Orange, has gone on to be a coach for some time and is now with the Ignite team, was just hired earlier this year. Mentioned to me in the interview I did, my follow-up after I spoke to Dyson at All-Star, which is that he's a quiet kid, but not quiet in a very reserved, very timid way. He just has such a confident, business-like approach to the game of basketball, to wanting to get better. Game of basketball. I think that probably comes from his dad. His dad, a guy by the name of Ricky Daniels, was played college ball at NC State in the 1970s before heading down to Australia and having quite the career down there. Dyson, just the way he carries himself and the way that he approaches the game of basketball and wanting to get better at the game of basketball is something that I found really impressive. One thing that really stuck out to me as I was going through my notes from when I spoke to him was when I said, who are the basketball players you watch the most? He eventually got to Chris Paul, to LeBron, to Kevin Durant, to Giannis, those sorts of guys. But the first two players that he named were Tyrese Halliburton and Alex Caruso. Halliburton because they're both bigger playmaking guards. Caruso because of just his defensive tenacity, his approach on that end of the floor, that sort of thing. So when I spoke to him, the fact that he understood what he is as a basketball player and how good he is at those sorts of things, just really like his level of awareness about what he is and how he needs to approach the game and how he can and plans on getting better. He's just a really impressive kid. And I think that, we'll talk about his fit on the Cavs, whether or not he'll even make it to the Cavs. But I think he's the kind of guy who will help out any basketball team, even if I has some reservations with how he fits in with the Cavaliers.
Do you think he's able to make more of an immediate impact in his NBA career, or since he's so young and he kind of took the G League Ignite path, do you think he needs time to season, time to condition, and maybe not going to like we'll talk about the Cavs fit, like you said, but maybe like a team that allows him the opportunity to grow and learn from his mistakes versus maybe more of a playoff caliber team who's like, okay, we need you to do X, Y, and Z right now?
It's a good question because let's start by getting into how he ended up on the Ignite team. Dyson played a lot of for a lot of like state, national level teams in Australia, but was, similar to Josh Giddey in that his dad was a professional. He was just around the game in Australia. He and Josh are friends, like professional around the game. After his dad's games, he'd go and shoot on the court. He was just in that environment his entire life. He went to the NBA Academy in Australia, was able to, I believe he played for a tick for his dad. It's a second division team in Australia, the Bendigo Braves, played for them for a little bit. And when it came time to make the decision on what he wanted to do, he basically had three paths open to him. One was the college basketball path. He could, if he wanted to come to the United States, played college ball somewhere. It's a path that his family knows very well because of his dad. Number two is he could have done what a lot of young stars in Australia have started doing, which is go through the Next Stars program in the NBL. It's the program that Josh Giddey went through. Outside of Australia, it's the program that Terrence Ferguson went through, LaMelo Ball went through. He could have pursued that, but what he wanted to do is he wanted to go to the NBA's G League Ignite team, because while he made clear that there were opportunities everywhere, the G League Ignite team was going to be so focused on his development as a basketball player, getting better as a basketball player, and being in a professional environment. So he has been in not an NBA level environment, but an environment that has been so focused on basketball from the time he was probably 14 or 15 years old, and solely focused on basketball from the time he was 14 or 15 years old. And I say all that to say this. I don't think it's going to be a big culture shock, him getting to an NBA team and him having to contribute to an NBA team. I think he will be able to take all of that in stride. I think the stuff that he is good at as a defender, as a playmaker, as a rebounder are things that are going to translate well right away. The question is whether or not he is going to be able to step onto an NBA floor and provide some level of shooting basically from the jump, some level of scoring basically from the jump. And that's something that he's mentioned that he is going to focus on getting better at. So I think he has it all up here between the ears. I think that to that end, he will be ready from day one. It's just whether or not the skill that, especially on a team like Cleveland, where you're going to have a guy like Jared Allen kind of patrolling in the middle, you're going to have a guy like Evan Mobley who could step out but is still a big man, and you need to provide him a little bit of spacing. That's just the one big question that I have about his jump to the NBA, but I generally think that he's going to be a guy who, because of his background, is going to be able to take everything in stride from day one.
I think when we talk about the fact he's been a pro since 15, and that he's been around this environment, that is like there is like the stuff from his dad, and then he's mentioning Caruso and Halliburton, and like obviously mentioning like the best of the league, some of the greatest of all time. But he's like signaling out guys who like very much understand their role. Mm-hmm. That would give me some optimism that he's maybe going to be able to do something in year one. Now, like what is it year one? How much development is stuff behind the scenes in the G League is one of these things. I don't think we always know how that works guy to guy yet. I remember I listened to like an interview with Jalen Green recently where he was talking about how like that structure was like really just like letting him like foster growth and also like take college classes and things. And like, it just allowed him to like do sort of a version of the college thing, but that was specifically curtailed to get him prepared to make that leap. And if like, that's what he got in a less COVID affected world than maybe the bubble year, that's like an interesting place for a prospect to come out of. And like, look, we've seen guys from the G League, maybe not like in the cleanest way possible. Green obviously was a bucket from right away. Maybe some other stuff in his game didn't come our way. Kuminga had some moments in his rookie year coming out of that program. We still don't know like how these guys are going to translate. And I think if you're Cleveland, I think that kind of prospect interests me, even if like we can talk about the fit, but that kind of prospect interests me just because I look at him and say, okay, there's a guy that maybe we can do something with now and like give some minutes to, because we don't have like the deepest roster right now. We're lacking for guys really to kind of round this rotation out. But maybe a guy that is going to help us now, but also can kind of let us play this long game a little bit if everything goes to plan, and we're not going to get a pick as high as 14 in the next couple of years. That's kind of an interesting prospect to me if you believe in him. And then we do know interviewing him at the Combine. We do know it seems like they like him. Again, we'll see if he gets there, but there's some intrigue in like the mold of what this guy is from an IQ perspective, from a height perspective. All those things combined make him, I think, interesting if you want to kind of a little bit of both worlds if it breaks right for him. But first, I'm going to tell you about our friends at BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL features. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to the playoffs to esports and more. For instance, if you go to the NBA Finals are coming up. They have the Warriors as a minus 156 favorite, and the Celtics are plus 136 underdogs. That series tips off on Thursday, so check out BetOnline as the odds for that series come and go and change. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. That's BetOnline. That's where the game starts. Now, back to our episode with Bill DiFilippo.
Yeah, and one thing, a quote that I'll read was, I basically said, like, I don't want you to trash college basketball. I don't want you to trash the NBL, but like when you look at those three pads, what was it about the G League Ignite team that was so good for you? We said the G League Ignite had the best development on and off the court. I was able to go through off-court media training. We learned about our bodies, nutrition, stuff like that. It's NBA games, NBA length courts, NBA coaches who have played in the NBA. It's veterans who were in the NBA for one time or another. And then he said they all have benefits to them, but I think my interests were with the G League because I'm into development. Like, he wanted to be able to go into an environment where he's waking up in the morning and he's getting better as a basketball player, where he's going to go grab a bite to eat and then come back and work on his game as a basketball player and doesn't have to worry about all the other things. And then, of course, there's the stuff that comes with being a basketball player that isn't going out on the court, like the media training, like you mentioned, like learning about nutrition and what you put into your body. He mentioned that one thing that he likes to do is he likes to cook. He's been a big fan of throwing together steak, mashed potatoes, and broccoli for himself. Like, he's learning these sorts of things that, how do I want to, the stuff that you don't think about that goes into being a professional athlete, along with, you're doing 90-minute, 2-hour session.
What you're saying is, and I'll say this just in the most blunt way possible, we're not going to get like the anecdote in a profile where it's like he's Dwight Howard and like loves eating lots of candy every day. Like, we're not going to hear like stories about him eating like 2 pounds of like candy and like his diet just being like absolutely garbage. Like that. And that's a thing. That's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the other thing was, he said that when he would get back to his room, he'll play some 2K, he'll play Apex Legends, he'll play he'll fire up the video games, but he goes back and watches 2 or 3 NBA games a night. Like, he wants to be able to pay attention to what the pros are doing and how he can absorb that stuff. And then, like you mentioned, the 2 players he mentioned off the jump, like, if that doesn't, to me, when he said that, I mean, Chris, Evan, you both have done this long enough. You know that when you ask a young guy who are the players you like watching, you're getting LeBron, you're getting Giannis, you're getting KD, you're getting all these sorts of guys.
I got a Jokic last week, and I was like,
The fact that he said from the jump, Tyrese Halliburton, Alex Caruso, that took me back a little bit in a way where I was legitimately impressed, because that's just not something you hear from young players. And if you do hear those sorts of guys from young players, it's always after they say LeBron, after they say KD, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it really is interesting because you kind of notice it sometimes during the combine process as well. Like, EJ Liddell stood out because they said, like, who are some of your favorite players to watch? And he did say LeBron and company after the fact, but he mentioned Grant Williams first, and I texted Chris that, and I know Chris just had like an alarm go off in his head because he's a Grant Williams truther. So I think that is refreshing. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I think it is refreshing, and it does show a little bit of maturity. And like you said, he kind of knows who he is as a player right now, and these are the guys maybe he needs to study a little bit more closely so that he can succeed right out the gates. And you alleviated some of my concerns, I'm sure our listeners as well, with maybe just the moment being too big for him, and the fact that he's studying players he is familiar with, and maybe he can kind of like take examples from, really does make him seem like an appealing prospect. Now, just the question is, after his sudden growth spurt, will he be even available for Cleveland at 14?
Yeah, I mean, before we started, I was going through a couple of big boards, mock drafts, that sort of thing. Sam Vecini over The Athletic has him as his number 10 prospect, and going to Washington at 10. Jonathan Givony of ESPN has him going to the Spurs at number 9. So it's possible that he, it's always possible he falls. It's the NBA draft. Weird things happen all the time. But I think I'd be a little bit surprised if he was still there.
I think I would too. I should know, just for branding purposes, Rafael Barlow, our lockdown expert, has him going 14 right now.
Okay.
That I think like that 9
Cliff,
to.
Did you cut him a little bit of that editor bonus? Like we're cutting Mac because we've announced it at this point. So
yeah,
put him there.
No cut. Just
no cut for Rafael.
I subscribe to a Substack. I gave him some money for his Substack, so he's doing well. But like I think if he's there at 14, it would be interesting to see, like, depending on what other guys are there and like how the board checks out. Like if they're picking between like a Daniels or like a Jeremy Sochan or like an Ochai Agbaji, if they like, depending on what they feel like they need, that would be sort of interesting. But it's like the comp that I've seen with him, and I don't like love player comps, but if it's like Caruso, Halliburton, like Lonzo Ball kind of guard who's bigger, like that's such a valuable, malleable thing you could do. And it'd almost be hard for me if he's there at 14. And maybe we're being really optimistic, so maybe we should get into some of the concerns. That would be so intriguing to maybe have a hard time passing up. So, Bill, that leads me to transition to, okay, so you look at him as if the Cavs are evaluating him and interested in him, whatever. What are your concerns about him as a thing that would actually help Cleveland as we understand them as a team right now, with kind of that big three of Garland, Mobley, Allen, and with the rest of the roster?
Yeah, I mean, so much of what I think the Cavs need, we saw in their play-in games, if Darius isn't giving them perimeter scoring and shot creation, it's just such a huge question mark on the roster. Karis LeVert is, a player who certainly has stuff that he is good at. At the same time, he's a career 33.3% three-point shooter. You have Colin, who Lord knows what the future is going to hold for him, and then you're banking on a guy like Isaac Okoro, who for the stuff that he does well, if you're relying on him to give you scoring, to give you shot creation for himself and others, you're taking a gigantic risk by doing that sort of thing. So when I look at a guy like Dyson, who he brings so much value as like that kind of connecting piece where,
speaking my language, brother,
he really rates himself defensively as a guy who, when he exactly said, quote to me, "I feel like when I'm able to get downhill, come off ball screens, find big men, find shooters, create for other people, and then I've got a nice floater as well." Those are the sort of things that he's good at. My concern with him is that while I don't think his jumper is completely broken by any stretch of the imagination, connected on 25.5% of his threes, he took about 3.5 per game, 74-ish% free throw shooter, averaged 11.3 points per game. I like him as a player. I think that he brings that sort of stuff where he's a really good fit next to Darius and next to those big men. if he has that other sort of guy who can take a little bit of the pressure off. So it begs the question, if you're putting him in for Lauri Markkanen, if you're putting him in for Mobley for stretches, if you're trying to go small and you're putting Mobley at the 5, taking Allen off the 4, and you have that kind of 2 guard next to Darius who can provide a little bit more oomph on the perimeter, I do think he's a nice fit. Otherwise, you have to start asking yourself, are the Cavs a team that really needs, like the thing that they need to go for is passing, is defending, is a guy who's going to make the pass before the pass, who's going to find the open shooter, that sort of thing. Maybe a guy like Malachi Branham instead, who I think Dyson has a higher floor than Malachi Branham, but I also think Malachi Branham is going to, if he works out, is going to be the exact kind of player who helps Cleveland out a ton. Maybe you go in more in that direction. Maybe you go in more of a direction of an, I don't know, thinking off the top of my head, Ochai Agbaji from Kansas, who's a really good shooter, and try to alleviate some of the concerns that come from having a couple of big men on the floor. So there's so much you have to analyze with a guy like Dyson and whether or not you want to go. I think he's elite at this, and this, and then he has this stuff he needs to work on, but he's also 19 years old. So you don't want to write a guy off from the time he gets into the league as a 19-year-old, because he can always get better at that sort of thing.
No, I absolutely agree with that. It's just, I don't know. When Chris and I look at it, like when we're just breaking down like what the Cleveland's biggest needs are, obviously wing depth is a glaring thing. They tried to make it work by putting Lauri Markkanen into 3 and playing bigger. And I think that's why a lot of folks were only into the idea of maybe like Terry Eason, if he somehow is available for the Cavs at 14, just saying like, okay, he could maybe be your long-term option at the 3 if he can be a connective piece or a connector piece, as Chris better puts it. And it depends on just how you feel with Isaac Okoro, with Karis LeVert, with Colin Sexton, with a lot of these supporting cast players, and then you bring another rookie into the fold. So, like, I understand that, but I want to ask you just to shift lanes real quick. What makes you so sure about Malachi Branham's just long-term upside and fit with the Cavs versus what Dyson Daniels provides?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not sold on Malachi Branham as a long-term option, but what I will say is that, and I do want to just disclose, I haven't totally started diving into draft stuff nearly as much as I'd like to, but with a guy like Branham, I saw quite a bit of him, living in Columbus, watching a lot of Big Ten basketball. Sam Vecini pointed out his final 22 games, Branham, 17 points, 52.8% from the field, 43.2% from 3. If you think that the stuff that he is really good at and his scoring punch works next to Garland, and, it wasn't a hot streak to end the year, that is legitimately something that he can be in the NBA, I think that's really valuable. I don't think you can ever have enough guys who you give the ball to and say, all right, go get a bucket here, especially when a guy like Darius is going to create opportunities for buckets for guys forever. When you have a guy like Evan who teams are going to focus on him so much. Like, that guy is already so good. Like, it is ridiculous. He is only going to get better. He has some passing instincts as a big man. And once he starts facing double teams, if he is a guy like Malachi Branham out on the perimeter, or we'll remove Malachi Branham from this, just a guy in the perimeter who he can make a pass to, or he could pass it to Darius, that guy rotates over to Darius, he kicks it over to them. That's something really valuable. If that works out, if the Cavs decide to do what the Browns did with Denzel Ward and go, we just want to pick the best Ohio State player, by all means, let's do that. Let's sell a couple of T-shirts down in lovely Columbus, Ohio. Sure. But, the one thing I will say about Dyson compared to Branham is that I think Dyson has an elite skill. I think his defense is going to be very, very good from the moment that he steps into the league. And it's a matter of, do you want to bank on that sure thing, or do you want to take a guy who might need a little bit more work and refinement, but the thing that they are good at, potentially game-changingly good as a perimeter scorer?
What I think would be interesting here is these things don't happen in a vacuum. And, we know we've mentioned a little bit that Sexton's future. We don't know what that's going to be exactly yet. LeVert's future is also sort of in question here a little bit because last year of his contract, I wouldn't say he was particularly good during his Cavs tenure last year, and like midseason stuff is tricky, all that stuff, those caveats, but like wasn't a particularly helpful player. I don't think you didn't get the return I think you were kind of hoping for and giving up a future first for him. We'll see what year 2 looks like. If they believe in that, if that's something they believe in, maybe they look for a different flavor because they kind of will need that different energy. You know what I mean? Like there is some of that to kind of figure out. I also wonder I also look at Daniels and I've been thinking about it watching this playoffs a lot. The Golden State's like maybe doesn't quite have this guy because they have like Draymond, and Draymond's like a super duper star in defense. But like, look how many just like really sturdy dudes are playing defense in this way. Like, look at Boston's like perimeter defensive roster. It's like Marcus Smart is like built like a brick shithouse as a guard. Like Derek White's pretty solid despite being a little smaller. Like the fact that Jaylen Brown is often the slightest guy in their roster in a 5 is like kind of crazy. There's something I think to learn from like how teams are building out their defenses. Yes, you have Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, and maybe that allows you to take some risks on other pieces to boost your offense a little bit.
How dare you not mention Lamar Stevens when it comes to sturdy defenders?
No, it's fine. I get it.
Look, Lamar play the Grant Williams role. Kind of want to see him if he can make some threes. We're in some business here, but that's got to happen.
That's a leap.
Look, man, gets to 33% and like 36 from the corners. We're talking about a guy that should play some minutes. But I think we're in a tricky position in thinking about this, where it's like, which path do you kind of prefer? And maybe this summer is like picking that path a little bit. Like this could be oversimplifying it and everything, but like there will be some choices here just with the Sexton situation. Do they like run LeVert into the last year of his contract? Who do they take in the draft based on who's available? Like, look, Dyson could be off the board, and like Branham could just be like the best option for them there if the other 3-4 guys are off the board, and like they just say, okay, we need a wing. And we feel like the upside of him is maybe better than what Abaji is going to be. So that how this plays out, it's obviously 14 is not always a position where like you have a lot of control. You know, like 14 is like you're dependent on 13 other teams passing on a guy you really, really like and hoping that, you know, Daniels doesn't skyrocket up the board, which like honestly, like, you know, Shaedon Sharpe is kind of like the very fun, trendy draft riser here. It wouldn't shock me if Daniels kind of has a similar vibe just because like there's so much intrigue in that frame and what he can maybe do. Like maybe he slides into 9, 10 or up to like 8 or something. Like who knows?
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys a question. Do you think the Cavs should make this pick based on what their roster is right now and what their roster is going to be for the next year or two? Or do you think they should make this pick based on, we think we are going to have Darius Garland, we think we're going to have Evan Mobley, and then if you want to throw Allen in here, by all means. But like we'll throw Allen in here. We think we're going to have those 3 guys for at least the next 5 to 7 years. We need to build a roster around maximizing those due to the best of their ability. Or do you think it should just be, all right, best player available, whoever's number 1 on our board at that point, we take him?
If I'm picking a path, I pick the latter more than the former.
I figured.
I think, my strategy is always taking best player available because there's a reason why you're picking in that spot. But I feel like you need to flesh out what you have around Garland, Mobley, and Allen, because maybe last year wasn't a fluke and you need to build upon that success to ensure that you don't stumble out the gates and end up being this year's version of the Knicks or the Hawks, who are, a little flatter, at least just compared to what they were the year before. And that's just kind of where I'm at. But I don't really know what the Cavs thought process is either, because this is the first time they haven't drafted in the top 5 in the draft since Colin Sexton, because it was Garland, Okoro, Mobley, Chris, you can fill in other flip pieces as well.
Sexton, Garland, Okoro, Mobley, yeah. When those 4,
okay,
and then they've taken Dylan Windler and shit with other picks, but those are the lotto picks.
So, yeah, this is the first lotto pick outside of the top 10, we'll say. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of uncharted waters too. So I don't know what their modus operandum is here, but I would assume they're going best player available, but obviously they take into consideration maybe what they have on the roster. So they're not saying, okay, we have an overabundance of big men. We don't need to add another one to the fold. We have a need on the wing. We have a need a backup guard. Maybe that's where they kind of approach, and then they rank players based on the need, and then grab the best player based on like just overall need at that point.
I also would not expect to pick a player at 14 who's actually going to be good as a rookie.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot too, where if you take like Branham as an example, we think maybe there's a little bit of overlap with Karis LeVert just based on their games right now. And if you keep Karis LeVert on this roster until the deadline, it kind of muddles things. And especially if you have Colin Sexton there as well, it muddles things too. So maybe you bring him along more slowly and you get him spot minutes at like the back end of the rotation instead of having him play like 25, 30 minutes a night. And that's the guy at 14 kind of just playing that spot there.
Yeah. If you're picking a guy at 14 and hoping they succeed, it's not going to be like Mobley is obviously like an outlier in a lot of ways, but like rookies just don't like drive like actual winning. And even guys like Bam Adebayo is like an awesome player who was picked 14th overall. It took him like 2 years to like really solidify himself in the league. Like this takes time. And so let's end on this, Bill. You look at the Cavs right now based on the season they had. We've had a little time to decompress from a little bit and think about it, and whatever. What do you think they actually are as we head into this offseason and this pick? Like, are they in a spot where there's like, is this like a foundation of like something to come? I imagine there's like obviously going to be, it's the vibe will be, I think, more expectations next year. I think regardless of sort of what they ultimately, like what we actually, just based on the season they had, but is this team in a spot where like they are headed somewhere, I think, fairly interesting, or what do you feel like they are actually at right now as they're maybe making this big, adding someone like Daniels into the fold?
How much stock do you put into, and this kind of answers the question, how much stock do you put into the fact that they were really good for 60, 65 games, and then the wheels came off because of injuries, because of just like everything. They were kind of a Murphy's Law team down the stretch. And to me, I think if you're trying to figure out what the Cavaliers are, if you're trying to project out the next however many years, I mean, you have a guard who is 23 years old who averaged 22 and 9 and connected on 38% of his threes. You have a rookie big man who is at 15 and 8 and provided legit, he had a case for being one of the most, not even a case for being, he is one of the most impactful rookie big men that we've seen in quite some time. I think the fact that they have those two sorts of guys means that they have a chance to be pretty good for the next however many years. And I'm inclined to say that if you're trying to look at this team and say, well, they didn't make the playoffs, they finished in 9th, whatever you want to say, I think that does a bit of a disservice to the fact that it took a lot of things going wrong for them to get into that spot. So I think they're going, I think if you're looking at the Eastern Conference, they're one of the teams that have a pretty exciting outlook over the next couple of years. I don't think that means they're going to be competing for a championship, but I also don't think that means they're going to be in like the zone the Sixers were in before they decided we're tired of finishing 7th and 8th, losing in the first round and doing the process. So there's a lot to be excited about. I think this pick is a very interesting one because there is a chance this is the last time they're going to be able to get a lottery level talent for the next couple of years. So.
I think if things go to plan for them, and to some degree, even if that means just being like a 3 or 4 seed every year, that is the plan. And with this pick, they won't have their 2023 first because that's going to go for the Karis LeVert trade. So they're already going to be down one. So this pick kind of has some importance, I think.
I mean, when was the last time the Cavaliers were a consistent top 4 team in the Eastern Conference without LeBron James around? Let's be honest.
The 97-98 season.
But even before, if you want to say like consistent success, it's like the Mark Price era.
So this is like, I think the Cavaliers understand the importance of let's build to that and then put ourselves in a position where, 1 or 2 breaks go our way. Maybe we're making an Eastern Conference Finals. Maybe we're doing something like that. But they're a really interesting team. Again, in part because I think this is the last time, even beyond the fact that the pick is heading to Brooklyn next year, I think this is the last time they can take the kind of swing on a guy who can provide a lottery level talent, lottery level impact for the next couple of years. So they're one of the teams that I'm really interested, like beyond the fact that I am appearing on a Locked On Cavs podcast and I talk to Chris every day. I am legitimately interested in seeing what they do in the draft and over the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Bill, but this is why, like, I think we talk 95% about European soccer and then 5% about Nick Cambiati's stressed out Celtics fandom in that chat. I don't think we've talked about the Cavs in months, which is good for a podcast because we saved it all for the show.
Yeah, this is primo content, baby.
Evan, any final things we need to do before we get out of here?
No, I think we wrapped this one up nicely. Chris, no more soccer clips, please. I don't want us to get a copyright strike, but
yes, soccer clips?
Foot.
The ribbons are blue. Manchester is.
Stop hurting his feelings. That's not nice.
No,
but,
his team just—that's his team. They won the title.
okay.
They scored 3 goals in 3 goals in like 3 minutes and 36 seconds to win the Premier League title.
I just saw. I saw the San Antonio Hotspur score 7 goals the other day.
This guy calls me a Arsenal fan. Tells me he had a Paw Patrol mug the other day.
He pulled out his Tottenham mug. I'm like, is that a Paw Patrol mug? And then his wife laughed at it when I told her that. But I think that wrapped it up nicely. Chris, why don't you send us home?
Yeah, check out Bill and the whole Dynamite
Before
roster.
we get any further.
No, you're always grinding my gears a little bit, buddy. Check out Bill and the whole team over at Diamond Up Rocks. Him, Robbie Callan, Martin Rickman, Brad Rowland, the man, the legend himself, over there doing a ton of great stuff. Check them out. The young King Jack Frank is always once in a while dropping great stuff. Katie Heindel dropping bars every once in a while. It's a good squad over there. Check them out. Follow Bill on Twitter at Bill D Filippo for very good Penn State, Man City, and NBA tweets and the occasional Liver King reference. And subscribe to Locked On Cavs wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe on YouTube. We'll be back on Monday, so have a good weekend. Enjoy Memorial Day weekend. And Evan, you stay safe, buddy. That's all I'm asking this weekend. No shenanigans, okay?
No shenanigans. You got it.
Peace.